Good morning. My name is Joanne Wong, and I'm Director of Corporate Services at the Greater New England Minority Supplier Development Council. Thank you so much for taking the time today to participate in our How to Do Business with JPMorgan Chase. Today, we have Nancy Manchillo, Global Supplier Diversity Manager, Deborah Berry, New England Market Executive Director and Market Executive, and Jim Kwok, Banker Associate, who will provide an overview of the Procurement and Supplier Diversity Program at JPMorgan Chase. Thank you so much to JPMorgan Chase for being a gold level annual sponsor of G&E MSDC. Our annual sponsors are critical in helping us provide MBE programming, and we could not do our work without them. So just a few housekeeping items before we begin. We will be recording this session. The presentation will be shared following the conclusion of the event. And at the end of the presentation, there will be time for Q&A. Please make sure you use the Q&A box and not the chat function, so that we don't miss any questions. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Nancy, Deb, and Jim.
Thank you, Joanne. Good morning, everyone. It's our pleasure to be here this morning, and we're happy to share with you our slides and our presentation around doing business with JPMorgan Chase. And I believe, Deb, are you going to start for us this morning?
All right. Yeah. So can you flip over to the next slide, please, Joanne?
Oh, sorry, Shim.
Okay, so just to start the conversation, I'd like to kind of start by sharing about what we're doing within the diversity, equity, and inclusion space to frame our conversation. So over the course of the last year, particularly in the wake of the social justice movement and after the death of George Floyd, the firm has been really intentional about supporting and investing in a diverse and inclusive environment for our clients, employees, and partners. And why is that? It's because we want our firm to represent the communities where we do business, because that will allow for our employees and clients to feel welcomed and valued. And ultimately, a company that better reflects the community, better serves the community, and can potentially have a generational impact. So how exactly are we trying to do this? How are we trying to make an impact for underrepresented groups within our firm and in the community? Well, we're doing this by taking a more targeted approach and focusing on women, the Black community, and veterans. So just quickly, some key highlights from each category. So Women on the Move is the firm's commitment to provide women with opportunities to succeed in their professional and personal lives. It started off as an internal program and has since expanded into the community, where we have now pledged to lend $10 billion in new credit to women-owned businesses. So next, Advancing Black Pathways seeks to help Black communities achieve economic success. We target 4 key areas: careers and skills, financial health and wealth creation, business growth and entrepreneurship, and community development. Internally, we're committed to hiring and developing Black talent of all levels. And in that same vein, the Office of Military and Veterans Affairs is also highly focused on employment for veterans. The firm leads the Veteran Jobs Mission, which is a group of 200 top companies that have committed to hiring 1 million US veterans. And JPMorgan as a group has already hired 500,000 veterans in the company. And on a more personal note, I am actually a direct result of this program. I served in the Army for 5 years and was hired through the military program. So I'm very grateful for programs like these because they really do make a difference. And there's just so much the firm does. And what I want to hit home is that these opportunities are available to you as well. We recently opened up a community center in Boston, specifically in the Mattapan Chase office. And our community manager, Sabrina Carrera, she hosts workshops and financial education seminars for consumers, small businesses, and nonprofits. She was actually born and raised in the area, so she is very aware and well connected to the community. So I encourage you, please, if you're ever in the area, check out the community center in the Mattapan Chase office. Next slide, please. So along with the efforts I described in the previous slide, the firm has made some major financial investments in diverse-owned businesses, and I'll touch base on a few here. The first item I want to highlight is that we spent $2.7 billion on diverse suppliers last year. We are one of 2 banks in the $1 billion roundtable, which is a collection of 28 companies that have committed to spending at least $1 billion each with diverse suppliers. And one of the biggest ways that JPMorgan is trying to help diverse-owned businesses is to be mindful of our vendors and intentionally choose diverse suppliers. And in addition to the $2.7 billion, we are dedicating an incremental $750 million with new and existing Black and Latinx suppliers, and $64 million on veteran-owned suppliers. So that's on the supplier side. And we're also looking at how we can help close the racial gap further through private equity and by investing in MDIs and CDFIs. And I know there are a lot of numbers on this slide, but the bottom line is that the firm truly cares about investing in the right projects and being generous with those investments to make an impact in our communities. And it starts from the top. It starts with our leadership, prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that influences the culture within JPMorgan Chase. And no company is perfect, and we still have a long way to go, but it's encouraging that we're also now expanding externally to the community with our DEI efforts. So with that, I'll pass it on to Deb, and next slide.
Good morning, and as Shim explained, we also like to give back to our community, and we are here in Boston and throughout Massachusetts and New England. We've been in the market for over 40 years, but yet we are committed to continued growth within the market. Today we have 24 branches throughout New England, and that number will be growing. It should be at 75 by 2023. Again, pushed, as you can all imagine, with COVID, construction has been pushed back a little bit on that front. But with that comes more employees and more philanthropic dollars in our community. And as Jim said, we are committed to spending throughout the country, but here locally, we've already committed close to $6 million on philanthropic investments, including our investment in our partnership with Compass, Jewish Vocational Services, and Youth Build Boston. Again, when we make a commitment, we want to help grow the community and make an impact by providing skill-based learning in those communities. And again, we have over close to 2,000 employees growing and committed to this market. We help companies grow. If you want to move to the next slide. When we look at a company, we can from start until its exit strategy. And so we have, as Jim alluded to, our community-based program and our branches to help businesses that are getting started, smaller organizations that might need access to a daily branch, all the way up through large corporate organizations. And our team here in New England, Shim and I, support privately owned businesses with financing, cash management, and investment solutions, whether it be to buy an additional company and grow your business, or a line of credit to help buy inventory and help through those challenging times. We are here to support those efforts. We also use our network in the community to find outside sources of capital when necessary. Please never hesitate to call either of us with any interest in learning a little bit more. Again, our cash management solutions as well are there to support your business. We invest in partnerships with top brand new fintechs in the market. For example, Bill.com, we've partnership and white labeled that product on our own website to allow for free access to a billing program, similar to what the large organizations are using, like JPMorgan, when we are able to provide access to a similar program scale to meet your business's needs. Again, we're really here to talk to you guys about how to do business with us. So I am going to turn it over to Nancy, but if there's ways we can support your business and its growth, please reach out.
Well, thank you so much, Deb, Shim, and Joanne. And thanks to all of you who are joining this webinar this morning. We appreciate your participation and your interest. And so taking a look at supplier diversity and how it really fits into the larger JPMorgan Chase organization, I think this slide helps us sort of understand that. So Shim mentioned our efforts in diversity and inclusion at JPMorgan Chase. particularly relative to our racial equity commitments, but across the board, I would say. And that includes our workforce, the workplace, as Deb and Shim both described, with our city centers and our branches and all of the services that are provided there. And then what we call the marketplace. And the marketplace for us is really the supply chain. And that's where global supplier diversity lives at JPMorgan Chase. So we are embedded in the supply chain, and we'll go to the next slide and learn a little bit more about our organization. So what is our role? What does supplier diversity do? Why are we here, so to speak? And our role is really to increase diversity, and I like to say inclusion as well, within JPMorgan Chase's supply chain. So what we're doing is we're creating a supply chain that mirrors our customers' changing demographics, and frankly, the supply chain's changing demographics as well. By doing that, we drive economic growth in the communities in which we do business. And we can go to the next slide, and you'll see how that's all tied nicely to what Shim and Deb described as well. Here you can see the size and scope of JPMorgan Chase in terms of our assets, our employee base, our retail branches, and as mentioned, we're growing and expanding. We're also touching millions of households, millions of small businesses, and we're in 100 countries. So you can sort of get a sense of the size and scope of the company. And we can go to the next slide. Thank you. I really like this slide too, because we talk about, and it really is key, it's really around value relative to supplier diversity. You know, how are we creating value for our customers, our stakeholders, and frankly, our suppliers? And we're doing that by providing opportunities that could create, in fact, greater wealth within diverse communities. Supplier diversity also provides a great avenue for access to innovation because of the many diverse suppliers, not just in makeup, if you will, in terms of ethnicity or gender, but also just in terms of ideas of products, services, a whole myriad of ideas that come through innovation. And then I think the other thing that's very important for all of us certainly is that corporate differentiation, our brand reputation, if you will. That's very important to us, and that creates value as well. And then perhaps one of the most important ways that our role in JPMorgan Chase, our role of supplier diversity and inclusion, really is around attracting and retaining tomorrow's employees, and frankly, today's employees. We all know what a challenge there is to attract and retain employees. There's a great labor shortage. And so, you know, we want to be the employer of choice, and we do that by matching values, right, of those within our communities where we work and do business. We can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I don't have to tell you all what a diverse supplier is. You certainly know, but I think this might be helpful to just to see the classifications, if you will, or certifications that we at JPMorgan Chase recognize. Probably no big surprises here, but we always think it's helpful for our audiences to understand around those different types of certifications and different types of segments within the diverse supplier community. We can go to the next slide. And we also want to share with all of you the partnerships that we have. Some, of course, are certifying bodies and some are not, but we think it's important to share those partnerships that we have both nationally and, as you know, regionally with the Greater New England Chamber or Council rather, that we're working with today. So you can see how from a national and even global perspective, We also work at a regional level as well, and even local level for that matter. And we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So Shim spoke about this earlier, and I think this is important just to highlight this long-term commitment that JPMorgan Chase made at near the end, well, about this time, actually in October of 2020, around racial equity commitment. And it's a long-term commitment over 5 years. As you can see, the $30 billion across a broad swath of really, I think, our whole enterprise, in lending, in the retail side of the house, certainly in supply chain. So really across the enterprise, there's a commitment to really provide economic opportunity to underserved communities, particularly those within our Black and Hispanic and Latinx communities. And then within that, so think of it kind of like a funnel, right? So there's this, significant impact, right? And then we're funneling it down into very specific and very targeted areas of JPMorgan Chase, including our supply chain, where we're looking at a commitment of spending an additional $750 million with Black and Latinx owned, Hispanic owned companies over the next 5 years. Now, what's interesting about this is for some, we might say, well, I'm not Black or Latinx, but I'm a diverse business owner. Maybe I'm a veteran, maybe I'm woman-owned, but I'm not Black or Hispanic. All that to say, what I've observed as I've worked with our categories, and we're going to talk a little bit more about our actual practices within supplier diversity, is what this has done is sort of opened the doors for more supplier consideration. In other words, yes, we're very public about this commitment to Black and Hispanic owned companies, but I would mention to you that I've also observed this commitment, I guess for lack of a better term, sort of flowing over, if you will, into our other segments of diverse suppliers. We'll go on to the next slide and hopefully you'll see what I'm talking about. Thank you. Here's another example. So we've targeted what we're calling a city strategy for supplier diversity, aligned to a much bigger city strategy with lots more cities. I think it's at 15, again, across the racial equity commitment at the enterprise level. But for supplier diversity, we're relatively speaking a small group in a very large organization. So we have to be very targeted. And as you can see, our city strategy focuses on building these relationships and supplier development, supplier engagement in these 5 cities. And we talk about, as you can see here, why these cities, and, matching a significant JPMorgan Chase presence, alignment, of course, with our racial equity commitment, a variety of opportunities within these various cities, etc. So you may be thinking, but wait a minute, I'm in Boston and I don't see Boston here. So think about what I just said around how we're expanding while we say we have this commitment, and we do. It also sort of has a ripple effect in that we're sort of broadening the scope. And while we're targeted in these cities, here I am talking to you today, right? So I just want to assure everyone that even if you're not in one of these cities, even if you're not in a specific, ethnic group, if you will, that we've targeted, that doesn't mean that there isn't opportunity for you. We'll go to the next slide, and I think we'll see some reasons why this could, in fact, be the case. Thank you. And here we are. This is really, to me, while all the other information and slides that we've shared with you is important, I think for most of you, this is going to be really the most important thing that I could share with you. And that is, what do we buy? Do we buy what you and your company sells? And so I think this is really important because it helps really define the products and services that we buy. And so you can see here, and they're in no particular order, but you might imagine that technology rules, right, and professional services. Certainly we're looking for capabilities and businesses who can provide these services and products in all of these categories. But as you might imagine, particularly in cybersecurity, for example, being a financial services company, obviously that's important to us. Again, all of these are important, and we are indeed looking for companies who provide products or services in these categories. But you can see here, there's a myriad of opportunities to do business with us. Next slide, please. So how can you be in touch with us? You can certainly get my contact information from this webinar. We also have the supplier.diversity@jpmchase.com, which is a great way to reach us as well. We do ask that you register with us. And I know historically for some businesses that's been sort of a thorn in everyone's side. But I will tell you that we actually use ours. In fact, we have a whole extensive, what we call an intake process. And I know that sounds very clinical, but it is intentional within that registration portal, because what happens is that aligns then to those categories that I just showed you. And we have category leaders who we work with very closely. We literally have weekly meetings to assess the new supplier intake, if you will, the new prospect intake along all of those categories. Additionally, I would share with you, we don't have a slide for this, but I do want to share that we also have within our supplier diversity team what we call business development managers. And what they're doing is they're working with prospective suppliers, businesses who do register with us, who get on our radar. Once you've gone through that intake process, you will then have the opportunity to at least have your, let's call it your portfolio, the information that you provide us in that registration portal. That's reviewed by our business development managers. And depending on, you know, the capabilities, what we're looking for in terms of the categories that we're seeking, et cetera, you know, they would be in contact with you to start that process of engagement with JPMorgan Chase. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a description around what actually happens to that profile, you know, once you tell us about yourself and your company, so that it's not a black hole, it's not a dead end. There actually is some life behind that. So I wanted to be sure and share that with you. And Joanne, that may be the end of our slides. I believe that is true. And if that is the case, then I'll turn it back over to you in the event we have any questions or just next steps from your perspective. And thank you all very much. We appreciate your time this morning.
So we'd like to open it up for questions now. If you're able to type them into the Q&A box, that would be great. Oh, right.
Okay, so we have one question from Karen. She asks, what is your status with working with diverse staffing companies? I think this question, Nancy, it's probably best directed towards you.
I beg your pardon. I didn't catch that. With diverse, what kind?
Staffing.
Oh, staffing. Oh, so you may have noticed on the slide around the categories. So staffing is so interesting because sometimes it could fall into technology. I know there's companies, for example, that do specific, you know, technical recruiting. And so that's certainly an avenue. There's also sort of the non-technical staffing as well. And then, which falls under professional services. And then there's also very specialized technical staffing, i.e. cybersecurity. So I would say that we're interested in all three of those. There may be others too that I haven't mentioned, but certainly, you know, as I mentioned, there is demand for talent. We see it, we hear it, you know, daily. So yes, there is opportunity for diverse staffing, staff augmentation, contingent labor, suppliers for consideration at JPMorgan Chase.
Thanks, Nancy. We do have one more question, probably best for Deb. The question is, what is the status of JPMorgan working in person instead of remotely?
So we twofold. One, we are back in the office depending on capacity and state and local regulations. So we are back in person. We are meeting with clients in person. Internally, as of today, we have to have full vaccination in order to meet face-to-face with clients and to have a guest on JPMorgan properties. They must show proof of vaccination, but otherwise we are primarily back to business as normal. Unless an employee is not fully vaccinated, then they are asked to take 2 PCR tests each week until we see a change in the climate, COVID climate.
Yes, I'm returning to the office in I guess call it intermittent. You know, so many days in, right now I'm at home, but I was in the office yesterday, for example. So we are returning, and I think maybe each site may be slightly different, but we are seeing a return to the office obviously with, you know, following CDC guidelines.
So here in Boston, we have 50% capacity. So we're doing every other week until the state changes its regulations for companies our size.
Perfect, thank you. So we have several more questions trickling in. So this one is probably best for Nancy. So for technical, specialized tech and non-tech staffing, does JPMorgan use an MSP, which is a managed service provider, or
Right.
vendors?
You know, we do not, which is interesting. So, and I think it's because of how I described previously, and as you saw on the slide, there's so many, how would you call it, maybe work streams even, or there's so many different types of staff aug. I mentioned technical, non-technical, and then even within those, right, there could be, and I'm just kind of making this up for purpose of responding to the question, but you know, there can be very specialized staffing, right? Medical, for example, we don't hire that, but that's an example of very specialized. I know we do look at cybersecurity from the technical, that's very specialized, obviously. And when I say cybersecurity, meaning staff aug companies that specialize in that. So technical, staff aug, cybersecurity type companies who specialize in that. So that's a real life example. And then there's also, you know, the non-technical as well, maybe financial services, data analyst, you know, those types of roles too. So we do look at a very specialized, but to answer the question, no, there's currently not the managed services provider per se.
Okay, great. So then we have a question from RK Suku, and she asks, she says that she is a woman minority owned and CMMI level 3 company, currently supporting major telecom, Navy federal and federal clients on digital transformation solutions, as well as staffing solutions. So as a small business minority company, how can they showcase their capabilities? And is there any roundtable conference or events that JPMorgan is conducting about the RFP process?
Oh, great question. So yeah, not specifically to answer that question. We don't have a specific roundtable around the RFP process. However, we're happy to have a capability statement. I'm glad you asked that question because that is really helpful to us. If you email us at supplier.diversity@jpmchase.com with a capability statement, that would be fantastic. We will ask you to register, but that's good too, based on what I described earlier. That's really important to us. So nothing specific around the RFP process, simply because each category is slightly different and they manage those processes slightly differently. But rest assured, if there is an RFP or even an RFI process, we would ensure that you were made, aware of what that would entail. So you'd be familiar and comfortable with how to respond to that.
Okay, great. And the next question comes from Rakna Sharma. And she asks that after they register, is there anything they can do additionally to highlight their capabilities?
The other thing that I strongly recommend, and that's a great question, so thank you for asking that, is do what you're doing today, this morning. Participate with your local councils, be it the minority councils, the women councils, veterans, etc., LGBT, disability, all of those for which you are certified, because they provide you access to companies like JPMorgan Chase and other industries, other Fortune 500 companies. So I just recommend utilizing the network, as we refer to it, that can help you learn about opportunities. I would also suggest that the larger scale, and I know we've had to go virtual with many of these, but the national conferences as well. We've had to go virtual with them, but even being involved and engaged and participating in those workshops, and seminars, those types of things, I think can be beneficial because they can connect you with companies like JPMorgan Chase.
Okay, so we have another kind of procedural question from David Murphy. He's asking, after vendor registration on the website, when can they expect to hear back from a business manager?
So that's a great question, and that is dependent on the need, on the demand. And so in other words, there has to be what I call a demand signal. There has to be something that says we need this product or service, right? So if we don't need this product or service, then you may not hear anything initially, but don't be dismayed. It just means that, we're not specifically looking for that particular product or service at this moment. We have another contract, for example, that's already being fulfilled. There just isn't that demand right at this moment. But as I said, it doesn't mean that there won't be at some point in time.
Yeah, so are there any areas that you are looking for specifically right now? Are there certain areas that we are deficient in finding vendors that you would suggest?
That's a great question. Yeah, and so certainly the lending services, any of the mortgage lending services that were listed on that slide, that's certainly something we are looking for, very specifically, very targeted, Deb. So that would be, that's something we're definitely looking for actively. That's probably our biggest demand, followed by cybersecurity. And when I say cybersecurity, that's a broad category in and of itself. But if you have services in that space, certainly, register with us and, let us know that you do, whether it's in staff aug or whether it's in a particular service or an app or even a product. Because again, that's a very broad category in and of itself. We say it sort of generically, but it is a very specific category. So those two would be something that we would definitely, look at.
One thing too that I found was interesting, recently I received an email, for example, things you don't think about bank needing, but do you have a diverse candy supplier to provide candy to the branches? You know, the lollipops where all banks are known for at the front desk. So again, like,
Yes.
sometimes you might think, oh, my product doesn't fit a financial institution, but it might fit within a niche within properties if you're a cleaning supply or
Right.
manufacturer, or something that we can add to our list of giveaways to clients. So besides
Yes.
thinking what my product fits into JPMorgan is in like cybersecurity, we need to protect our bank accounts. You can be creative and don't hesitate to send in those to register, even if you think doesn't make sense or I don't see the synergies. You'd be surprised.
That's a great point. And additionally, I'm glad you brought that up, Deb, because there's also attention to localized buying as well. So it's not all on a grand global scale. A lot of it is, yes, right? We have to work with, very large suppliers, of course, but there's also some very localized buying that occurs too. And to your point, that could be, maintenance work of the facilities, that could be promotional items. Again, there's opportunities even at we actually call it hyper local. So at a very localized, scale, that can occur as well. So you just never know.
So we have another follow-up question along with this conversation. So for prospective vendors, is there a way that they can access current opportunities, or how do they know what we're looking for?
That's a great question. We don't publicize those opportunities per se. We certainly, again, work with the category leaders very closely when there is an opportunity to ensure that those suppliers that we've identified throughout sessions like this, for example, are indeed included. But of course, you can only be included if we know about you and if you've registered with us. So that's probably, again, it kind of all goes back to that registration and letting us know about you so that we can align you to that proper category.
And even though, the vendor side has its own business managers, Shiv and I are here in the market as faces of the bank to help, again, whether it be as a strategic advisor, helping you grow your business with financing needs, or helping you navigate JPMorgan and the vendor program. Please don't hesitate to reach out to either of us, as we would be, again, I always say we're a huge place, but it's really only 1 or 2 phone calls to find the right person once you reach the bank. So just let us know.
Thank you. So we have a question from Frank Clement, and he's asking about the evaluation process. So can you speak, maybe Nancy, to your supplier evaluation and selection process?
Oh, yeah, that's
specifically for tech staffing firms. So maybe you can also share just general evaluation criteria as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. We actually have an extended deck that drills down a little bit more. So as you might imagine, we do have some what we call minimum requirements, and there are third-party oversight requirements that have to be met. I mean, we are a financial institution, so of course, you have to be able to meet certain standards. Probably no big surprise, right? So that will be important, and those specifically will be shared along that process, right? So if there is an opportunity, you would have already met with either a category leader or one of the business development managers to know what those are, right? If they're in, let's say if they're in technology, then there might be some very specific, technical requirements that have to be met. If it's on the mortgage lending side, for example, then there might be some very specific requirements there as well. But all that will be shared in advance of, any opportunity.
Okay, so this is also related to our conversation about selection criteria. Anu Rao is asking if JPMorgan looks for diversity in the contingent workforce. So for example, in their company, 10% of their workforce is made up of veterans. So does that play a factor?
It does. That's a great question. And yes, it does. And we are seeing, and I almost mentioned this earlier, so thank you for bringing that up, because we are seeing businesses that specialize in, for example, either veteran placement, perhaps people with disabilities placement, those that are on the spectrum of autism, for example. We know about businesses who specialize in attracting diverse talent, right, within their business. So yes, to all of that. And we just like you to call that out to the extent you can in your capability statement and when you register with us as well.
Thank you so much, Nancy and Deb. Those are the last questions. Is there anybody else that has any other questions?
I actually have a question. Thank you so much for sharing the registration site. Our corporate members always talk about how critical it is that vendors actually apply and put their information in. Can you talk about the education and development opportunities as being a registered supplier?
Oh, well, sure. That's a great question. So we do leverage, just like we are today, we leverage our advocacy groups to provide services, resources, I should say, educational. And I think what you will see is as the process, moves along relative to doing business with JPMorgan Chase, you will be informed of, all of our processes around, how this actually works. So, but really what we do are sessions like these that give you, just general information about how to do business with JPMorgan Chase. And then as the process continues, then we do, further sessions around, how that works, the actual process itself.
Wonderful, thank you. Oh, okay, I was just checking the chat. I think
Thank you.
that is it for our questions. Thank you so much, Nancy, Deb, and Shim, for your time today. We really appreciate all of this great information, and I will be sharing this presentation. And as mentioned, this has been recorded, so we will be putting this on our YouTube page. So if there are any follow-up questions, please reach out to me and I can get you in touch with the right person. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.